All right. Welcome, everyone. Lindred and Victoria and Jacob, Yankel, and Charlotte and Michael. And for those that will be watching this later, and for those that we have a few people that will be watching this and join us next time to this course called Colorful Profiles. And it's that you all should have had your colorful books. And I'm very excited about this. Thank you for joining. And some of you, it's maybe your first time joining our JLI course. Some of you, you're seasoned regulars. However, this is going to be very different than all the other courses we did because it's a lot more entertaining. We're going to be talking about history. And I know maybe some of you have feelings towards history. I know that Lindred's a teacher, so I'm sure you have positive feelings, but some of you maybe not. You know, they say, why didn't the class like the fruit smoothie that the history teacher made? You know why? Too many dates.
Oh, no.
Yes. So we're not.
Such a Jewish joke.
Oh, really? Yeah. You're gonna hear a lot of bad jokes. Get ready for that. Yes, bad dad jokes. But this is what we're doing. This is not going to be your average history class because first of all, we're not going to focus too much on dates. There's also no test, so don't be afraid. And we're going to be discussing some of the lesser known people in Jewish history. Each one of them are very important. They're not lesser known because they're not important. They're lesser known because there's so many stories that some stories get skipped over. And maybe some of you are familiar with them, but we're going to have 4 weeks, 4 classes. Each class is going to discuss a different theme. So, for example, next week's theme will be about influence, Jews that were influential on the world. On 2 weeks, we're going to talk about heroines, women that were very influential in Jewish history. Tonight's class is about converts, but besides just the overarching theme is that when we know our history, we know our present. And when we know what the Jewish past was like, we'll have a lot of insight in how Jewish life today is. We'll discover that things, as much as things change, they stay the same. And a lot of our challenges that we have today existed in various different forms. And the way that they dealt with it will maybe give us some insight how to deal with our challenges today. So that's today's course. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to chime in. And we'll start off with tonight, which is courageous converts.
Because we'll be able to see this better.
We're going to have 3 different converts that we're going to talk about tonight. But before we do that, we're first going to talk about what is Jewish conversion. What's the background of conversion to Judaism? So here's what you need to know. We'll go through a brief history of the world. And before there were religions, there was tribes, right? Maybe before Abraham and maybe even after Abraham, there were different tribes. Each tribe had their spirit and their God that they believed in. And what would happen was when 2 tribes would go to war, it would be a war of their gods in their eyes. And if one tribe conquered over the other tribe, automatically the conquered tribe would submit to this new God. They would say that our God died and now we serve this new God. That was how religions work. It wasn't really tribes worked. We call it tribalism. But then the world shifted towards something called universalism, which is that there became all these religions, and each religion felt that their religion is actually the religion for the entire world, right? So Hinduism, I'm not an expert on any of these religions, but let's say Hinduism believes that everyone should be Hindus, and Christians believe that everyone should be Christians, and Muslims believe that everyone should be Muslims. And they would take their religion in various different ways and try to bring other people, whether by will or by force. They would be missionaries, proselytization, that would try to get converts. Now, let me ask you, as much as you know about Judaism, is that a does Judaism do that?
Oh,
No,
Absolutely
we all know that, right?
not.
Judaism doesn't proselytize. The question is why? Is that because we're elitists and we believe no one's good enough? Or is there a different reason? Of course, we know there's a different reason. And it's as follows, that we believe in universalism, but in a different way. We don't believe in proselytization. How so? Jews believed that God created every single person the way they're supposed to be. Every human being exists just the way God made them. And no one was created with a mistake. Nothing was created by mistake, and nothing was created without a purpose. And therefore, if a person was created Jewish, that means his role in life is to be Jewish and to serve God with the 613 commandments that God gave him. If someone was created non-Jewish, that means that they're supposed to be non-Jewish and they get to serve God with the 7 laws that God gave them. And there is no reason for one to cross over to another, because let's read it. Text number 1, which is in, I'll say like this. Other religions believe, why do they proselytize? Just, in the most ideal form, it comes from a place they want to save everyone, right? If you don't believe in who knows who, you're going to go to hell. And if you do, you'll go to Eden, right? What does Judaism believe? So Judaism believes, text number 1
laws.
from Maimonides. It says, the righteous, and Jacob, could you read for us text number 1 from Maimonides? It's on
Righteous
page.
individuals among the nations have a share in the world to come.
Thank you. So what does that mean? Jacob said the righteous individuals among the nations have a share in the world to come. You don't have to be Jewish to go to heaven, right? So if we believe that you don't have to be Jewish to go to heaven, so we don't need to convert someone in order for them to go to heaven. They're going to heaven anyway, as long as they're righteous. In fact, Judaism discourages converts because of this very reason. Why change what God created? So, by now you're probably asking, so how do converts exist, right? If everything was created the way God created it, how do converts exist? Is that a good question?
Yes.
Right? How could there be converts if we're saying that there's no reason to convert? You're going to heaven anyway. Why would someone want to convert? That's a good question. We could talk about that. But why would Jewish people accept them? So the truth is, there's always been converts, starting from Abraham. Abraham says that he created a lot of, he cast his tent and he invited a lot of people to serve God. To Moses brought up a large group of Egyptian converts. There's always been converts to Judaism, notwithstanding everything we said till now. And the reason is because, as we'll see in a moment, first let's read text number 2, which is from the Talmud, from the Tosfos. The way we work in these classes is we go around, we ask people to read. That way, if you're bored of my voice, you could hear someone else's voice. So Victoria, could you read for us text number 2, which is on page 3.
We do not attempt to convince people to convert to Judaism, and we do not immediately accept anyone that asks to convert. There will be severe divine consequences for any Jew that proselytizes. However, we do accept non-Jews that are persistent in their desire to convert.
Thank you, Victoria. So the Tosfos, one of the 12th century Jewish sages, clarifies for us that there is a way to convert, and that is persistence. When someone, a man or a woman, is very persistent in saying that they want to join the Jewish people, and we'll get into what persistence means later, and then when we get to the stories, they can convert. Why is that? So there's a very fascinating explanation.
They can't.
Can.
They can convert.
Okay.
And the reason is that when someone is very persistently trying to join the Jewish people, that tells us that there's a spark of Jewishness that was within them all along. Meaning that for whatever reason, their soul has a Jewish potential. And when they join the Jewish people, we're not creating something new, we're revealing the hidden Jewish potential that was always in their soul. And that's in text number 3 from another rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Azulai. Linda, could you read for us text number 3?
Our sages teach that when we received the Torah at Mount Sinai all those years ago, the soul of the convert who would join us only many generations later was already present. This soul was at the incredible event at Mount Sinai, although its actual joining our people was deferred until now.
Isn't that fascinating? It's like mind-blowing. If someone converts, they're basically saying that retroactively they were Jewish all along. When they were not Jewish, they were not Jewish. They had a non-Jewish soul, but there was a spark of Judaism there that was waiting to be activated. And the Kabbalists explain that it happens that souls get mixed up and a Jewish soul comes into a non-Jewish body. Now, there's no way to know if someone has a Jewish soul or not. The only way we know is if they're persistent. If they're persistent in claiming that they want to join the Jewish people, then we say, why is this person so crazy about joining the Jewish people? It's a crazy thing to do. It can only be because they have something within them that's pushing them, and they can't be true to themselves if they don't. So this is just a very, very brief summary of how Jewish conversion works. And I skipped some of the slideshow, you'll excuse me. And now that was a very, very brief summary. And we could talk about this subject all night, but I know what you all came for. You came for the stories. That's what I came for, at least. So let's get to the stories of 3 converts to Judaism. There's been hundreds of converts to Judaism, but we're going to talk about 3 of them, which are very interesting, and they're unique in the fact, as we'll see, that these 3 people contributed to Judaism, something which Judaism would not have had if not for them. And they not only joined the Jewish people, they actually changed the Jewish people in different ways. And as we'll see, some of our greatest and brightest were converts. And the first one is Onkelos.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that.
I was about to ask if you could pronounce Onkelos.
Uncles.
Onkelos, there you go. Has anyone heard of Onkelos before?
No.
Yes,
Okay, we have one. No. How about you, Jacob? Have you heard of Onkelos
Yes.
before?
I've heard of him.
You've heard of it. Jacob's heard of him. Okay, good. So we have one familiar. What about you, Linda and Victoria? Familiar name, Onkelos. Okay, who could guess what type of name it is? Like, which region is it from?
With a Roman colon.
Ah, very good. You figured it out. It's Roman. It's a Roman name. And let's go back to 117 of the Common Era. There was an emperor, and I'm just going to say the story. I want to point out before we get to the stories that the stories we're going to say are based on historical documents, and they're based on we did our best to make sure it's factually correct and not legends, and we'll even get into that. So we'll see. So the first story is based on the record of the Talmud, which is the oldest Jewish body of knowledge. And the story goes as follows. Rome, in 117 CE, the Emperor Trojan, like the computer virus, Trojan's horse, No, not like the computer virus, but that was a joke. He passed away, and he was succeeded by Emperor Hadrian. Emperor Hadrian, the Jews hoped that he would actually treat the Jewish people better, and he actually was pretty kind for a while. He even claimed that he was going to let the Jews rebuild the temple, but eventually Hadrian decided that, you know, the Jews might rebel, and instead of allowing the construction of Jerusalem, he actually destroyed Jerusalem and rebuilt it as a new city, which he called, and I might be pronouncing this wrong, Aelia Capitolonia. I don't know. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but no one's correcting me. So we're gonna.
Close enough for government work.
What do you say, Jack?
I said it's close enough for government work.
Close enough. Okay, we're gonna accept it. So, and he built actually on the Temple Mount, he built a temple to Jupiter, the planet, which was the Roman god. And we even have here a coin you see this is a coin they found in your student books, which depicts this event. It has a picture of Hadrian on one side, and on the other side it says Colonia Baelonia Capitolonia. Later, this led to a big Jewish rebellion known as the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And after Hadrian put down the rebellion very brutally, thousands, I think the number is 500,000 Jews were killed. And then, you know what he did? He renamed Judea to a new name. He gave it the name of Syria Palestina. And we'll leave it at that. But he gave it that name to erase the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. Now, why are we talking about Emperor Hadrian? Because Emperor Hadrian had a nephew, and his nephew's name was Onkelos. And Onkelos, as you may have guessed, converted to Judaism. And the story is as follows. I'm going to read the story. This is a story from the Medrash, a work from the Talmudic sages, which was written in the 4th century, so about 200-300 years after these events occurred. And the story goes as follows. I'll be reading from text number 4. It says as follows. I'm just making sure no one's by the door. There we go. Onkelos the convert was the son of Hadrian's sister. He wished to convert, but he was afraid of his uncle Hadrian. Onkelos told Hadrian, I want to engage in business. So I'm asking for advice. So I'm just gonna insert my commentary as I'm reading the story. So if you're lacking gold and silver, Hadrian replied, my treasury is open for you. He said, you know, my dear nephew, you're the nephew of the whole Roman emperor. You're not missing nothing. He said, Onkelos said, I wish to travel abroad on business in order to become acquainted with other people. I would like your advice about what investments to make. Onkelos replied that, no, I want to have the experience of starting out on my own. I don't want to be dependent. You know, give me some advice. Hadrian replied, when you see merchandise that is valued low and disregarded, invest in it. Eventually, its value will rise and you will make a profit. He gave him the basic business 101, which is, you know, buy low and sell high. Tesla stock, or it used to be. Anyway, Onkelos traveled to the land of Israel and studied Torah. A while later, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua met Onkelos and noticed that his countenance was changing, meaning he was so engrossed in the Torah he was learning that he started looking less Roman and more Jewish, obviously in a spiritual way. They told each other, Onkelos is studying Torah. They knew who Onkelos was. He was the nephew of the Roman emperor. And they were able to tell just from seeing him that this man is no longer Roman. As Onkelos became close to these scholars, began asking them many questions and gave them explanations. And eventually, it doesn't say very clearly, that he converted to Judaism.
Right.
Now, the time passed and he was returned to Rome. Onkelos returns to his uncle Hadrian, and Hadrian asks him. Hadrian also noticed that Onkelos has changed. He's no longer that Roman prince that left here. There's something different to him. So he said, why has your countenance changed? Your business must have failed, or maybe someone is oppressing you. He said, oh, you probably did really bad in business. You look really humble. He said, no, I'm your relative. No one would oppress me. So why has your countenance changed? He told him, and this was very courageous. Could you imagine the same emperor that plowed over Jerusalem and put down a rebellion brutally? Now, guess this is what he hears from his own nephew. I've studied Torah and even circumcised myself.
Wow.
Hadrian said, who advised you to do such a thing? Why did you do that? And Onkelos replied, I asked you. I consulted with you. You told me. He said, what? I never told you to convert to Judaism. And he said, my dear uncle, when I asked you what merchandise to invest in, you advised me. You see merchandise that is valued lowly and disregarded, invest in it. I traveled the world among all the nations of the world, and I could not find a nation as lowly valued and disregarded as the Jewish people. This nation is destined to rise. He said, you asked me to find something which is low in price and play the long game. I found that with the Jewish people. I found that, yes, they're downtrodden and oppressed, especially at that time. They were literally stateless and they were oppressed by the Romans. It wasn't cool to be Jewish at all. And I decided that this is where the value is. Hadrian's advisor told him, since Onkelos has converted, you should kill him. Hadrian replied, my nephew Onkelos was destined to convert from the moment he was conceived. Even Hadrian realized that if he converted, he must have had something Jewish within him all along. So that's part one of the story of Onkelos. And we'll get to part two in a moment. But just imagine for a moment, this Roman prince converts to Judaism, which was life-threatening. You know, the Romans killed each other for things much less than converting out of the faith. And he could have been sent straight to the Colosseum to fight with lions for that. And he did it anyway, and he went back. I don't know why he went back. It doesn't really explain why he had to go back. But the point is that he had this conversation with Hadrian, and Hadrian let him go. He let him go, and it seems that after Hadrian let him go, Hadrian decided that, maybe actually I should get him back. So the story continues. This is from a different part of the Talmud, that the story continues, how Onkelos' story continued. It was the following story. Michael, do you feel up to reading text number 5, which is on page 9? It's a little long, so you don't have, if it's too long.
All right, let's give it a try.
Okay.
Onkelos, the son of
Kalonymus,
converted to Judaism. The Roman Empire sent a troop of Roman soldiers to seize him and bring him to the emperor. However, as I turn the page, Onkelos attracted them to Judaism with Torah passages, and he cited for them, and they converted. Wow. The emperor dispatched a second troop of Roman soldiers after Onkelos and ordered them to avoid discussions with him. As the soldiers arrested Onkelos and led him away, he said to them, let me tell you something trivial. A minor official holds a torch in front of a high official, and the high official holds a torch for a duke, and a duke for the governor, and the governor for the emperor. Now, does the emperor hold a torch before the common people? No, the soldiers replied, and Onkelos continued, yet God holds a torch. Maybe I should say, yet Hashem holds a torch in front of the Jewish people, as the Torah states. Hashem went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way for them, and by night in a pillar of fire to provide light for them. Exodus 13:21. The entire troop converted to Judaism. The emperor dispatched the third. Yes.
There you go. Yes. Sorry for interrupting.
And then the emperor dispatched a third troop of soldiers to arrest Onkelos. He ordered them not to talk to Onkelos at all. As the soldiers were leading Onkelos away, he saw a mezuzah fixed to a doorpost. He placed his hand on the mezuzah and turned to the soldiers, asking, "What is this?" "You tell us," the soldiers replied. Onkelos explained to them, "It is a standard practice throughout the world for a mortal king to sit inside his palace while his servants guard him from the outside, but not so for Hashem, for Israel of Israel. His servants, the Jewish people, sit inside their homes while he guards them from the outside. Thus, it is stated, Hashem will guard your departure and your arrival from now and to eternity." Psalms 121, verse 8. When the soldiers heard that, they converted to Judaism. Consequently, the emperor said, "No more soldiers after Onkelos."
Thank you, Michael. Very well read.
That's a
What a
great
story. Isn't that a great story?
Yes.
Yes, it's like, it's like you send your kids to go get the other kids and they're like, get stuck watching the movie they were watching. They're like, they kept on disappearing, these soldiers. And it's funny. It's a funny story. There's humor in the story, but there's also a lot of meaning. And the meaning, what's interesting is that the first story, we didn't really see what attracted Onkelos to Judaism, right? He didn't really, besides for just the idea that the Jews were valued low and will be high, he didn't really elaborate. In this story, we see a little bit more because the way he tried to attract the Jewish people attract the Roman soldiers to Judaism may have been give us a little insight of what attracted him to Judaism. So, we could talk about it, but this is maybe just one idea. And if you have any thoughts, please let me know. Which is that, and in the Roman pagan beliefs, the way they looked at God was some guy in the sky, or multiple people in the sky. There's Zeus and this guy and that guy, and they really don't care what's going on down here. And their job as the Romans, as the worshipers, was to keep them happy so the god shouldn't kill them, right? So they would bring their sacrifices to appease Zeus and whatever, in order that Zeus shouldn't decide to, strike them down or not to give them rain anymore. That was the philosophy. And when Onkelos discovered Judaism, he discovered, and actually it's the opposite. God created us. And God takes care of us. We don't have to take care of him. He lights the way for the Jewish people with the pillar of light. He puts a mezuzah on their doors to guard them. And that was a very revolutionary concept in that time, to say that God's not there to smite you down. Actually, God loves you, and God is there to guide you, and he is there to help you. And when you have a problem, you say, you trust in God and you turn to God. That was revolutionary. And that was one of Judaism's gifts. And eventually, today, all religions speak like that, but let's remember who had it first, right? So that was, at that time, it was very revolutionary. And Onkelos, it attracted Onkelos, and maybe that's what attracted the soldiers. And although we said that Jews don't try to convert other people, that was probably an exception because he needed to save his life, right? So I think his goal was to save his life, and the state chose to convert.
He was definitely proselytizing.
Yeah, but he definitely was. But I guess there's an exception if because the value of life comes above all. All right. And if you think about it, those soldiers choosing to convert was a very life-changing. They weren't doing it out of, superficially. They were also risking their lives. They were deserters. So we don't know their names, so, and what happened to them. But the point is, that was Onkelos. Now, why is Onkelos so famous? What effect did Onkelos have on Judaism? So earlier I asked you if you ever heard of Onkelos. And Jacob, you said you heard of Onkelos before.
Mhm.
In what context did you hear of Onkelos?
As a commentator on the Torah.
Exactly. So Onkelos did something which was the first in his time, and it's actually studied till today. He wrote a translation of the whole entire Torah. He
Really?
translated the Torah into Aramaic, not into Roman, but into Aramaic. In those days, many Jews did not speak Hebrew anymore. Jews were exiled to Babylonia, and their spoken language was Aramaic, not Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic, was like a mixture of that. I don't know what exactly Aramaic is. Very old language, but it was not Hebrew. It's similar to Hebrew, but it's not Hebrew. And the average Jewish person was not able to read the Torah. Onkelos, under the tutelage of the great sages of the time, wrote a translation of the Torah in Aramaic. Now, in order to translate something, you can't just translate. Every translation is by default also an interpretation, right? Just like in English, one word, if you want to translate something from English to Spanish, the word can't necessarily match. You have to choose which word conveys the meaning. It won't always line up exactly. How much more so when we're talking about the Torah, the word of God. To translate the Torah is an awesome responsibility. And Onkelos did that. And we have its translation till today. In fact, if you turn the page here to page 12, you'll see the very first printed edition of the Hebrew Bible has in the middle, that's the Bible, that's the Torah, and on the side, that's Onkelos's commentary. So till today, every single Chumash, let me see, let me take some off my shelf, if you'll give me a moment. Jump over the wires here. Let's see, we have one over here and one over here. So I'm back. So I have two different editions of the Torah. This is a Hebrew one. And this is the Torah, and this is Onkelos. Here's another edition. This is the Kahas edition. This is the Torah, and this is Onkelos. It's very rare for a printed edition of the Chumash not to have Onkelos. His commentary was so treasured by the Jewish people that it's the number one commentary. And he's a convert, right? So if you think, every single book has the word of God and the word of a convert right next to it. So it's amazing to think about. And it brings home the point that sometimes the converts have the highest souls. And if you look in your student book in the back of this lesson, there's actually some examples of how his translation is an interpretation, but we're not going to get into it. But when Onkelos wrote his commentary again, and around that time, in the 1st century CE, every commentary afterwards, if he's looking to understand the Torah, the first place they would look is Onkelos, because his commentary is not just his translation is also a commentary. So this was one of the most important Jewish works, in fact, that and let me just catch up over here to the slideshow. First of all, if you would think about it, maybe the reason why Onkelos wrote this commentary is because he was a convert. If a born Jew couldn't have done that, because they didn't have that experience of overcoming a language barrier to join the Jewish people. Onkelos came from the Romans. I can assume he didn't grow up speaking Hebrew. He had to learn the Hebrew language. And because he had that background, And maybe he had that experience of the Torah being locked to him and then opening it up. Maybe that what gave him the talent and the motivation to write the translation. Maybe also it's because he was very highly educated in language, right? He grew up as a Roman prince, and in those days, only the princes were educated. So we can make different theories, but one thing is for sure, his commentary has withstood the test of time. And in fact, till today, there's a Jewish custom every week to review the Torah before Shabbat. And there's a custom, it's called Shnayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum, which is that you read the verse of Torah twice, and then you read the translation once. So the custom is, before Shabbat, to read every verse of the Torah's portion twice, and afterwards to read the translation. So for many generations, they did this reading Onkelos' translation. Today, some people say the English translation or Rashi's commentary, but that is, in a nutshell, the story of Onkelos. And my friends, that was part one of tonight's class. We still have two more stories to talk about.
Do we know if he ever went to Judea?
He did, yes.
He did,
He traveled to Israel.
he did.
That's where he ended up in Israel. And the assumption is that he converted before the rebellion. And we don't know what happened to him after, but he was he settled in Israel. That's what we know. Any other questions before we go to the next story?
Where were his translations found?
So what's the oldest manuscript of his translation? That's a great question. I don't know. We know that the first Hebrew Bible had his translation, so that was in the 1500s, but they had it for many years before. It must have been passed down, handwritten, copied, and there's probably a few versions because of the way things, get lost. But I don't know. That's a good question. I'm sure it's Googleable. But the same way, go ahead.
I want to mention, I taught Sunday school for 18 years at Temple Sinai in Atlanta, and this is the first time I've heard of Onkelos. So it's interesting that not everybody knows about it. I'm glad to
It's
know.
fascinating.
Yeah,
And the other two people that we're going to speak about tonight and throughout this course are also, I'll be honest, the next two people we're going to talk about, I also didn't know about. So I'm learning as I'm teaching this course as well. But Onkelos is, I think, from all the people we're going to talk about tonight, no one had as much of an effect as Onkelos, because if you taught Sunday school for 18 years, you definitely repeated some of his teachings, whether you knew it or not, because he is the key to understand the Torah. So whether you knew it or not, he affected your life. So that's it's a fascinating thing to know. And yes, he was a Roman prince that converted to Judaism. So that is Onkelos. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Story number 2, my friends, tonight, we're going to talk about another story. This is a story of Ovadia the convert. Now, what's interesting about the story is that unlike Onkelos, who's been part of Jewish history for thousands of years, the story of Ovadia was, even though, as we'll see, it happened 1,000 years ago, we did not know the story till recently. And in order to understand that, we have to know about something called the Cairo Geniza. Has anyone here heard of the Cairo Geniza?
yes, we've heard of it.
Ah, very good. So what is the Cairo Geniza?
I have no idea.
It's a collection of manuscripts that
Oh,
was found in Egypt.
right.
Judaism has a custom that when we have a paper or a book with Torah teachings, we don't throw it away in the garbage.
No.
It's not respectful, so we put them out in a special collection box in the synagogue, and when the box is filled up, the manager takes it to the cemetery and buries it in a respectful way. So there's various, not everything has to be buried. Some things could be thrown out. Some things need to be buried in a special way. Like, for example, a Torah scroll, which is not usable anymore, has to be buried in a special clay pot. There's various different laws. And even here in Atlanta, there's a collection box, I believe, well, not here in Gainesville, but in Atlanta, I believe there's one across the street from Beth Jacob, I believe. So it's a custom till today. And in Egypt, there's a synagogue called the Ibn Ezra Synagogue, which has been around. Some say it's the oldest synagogue in the world. It's been around since the times of Maimonides, and earlier. And they also had a Geniza box. If you look on page, actually, I don't think we have a picture of it here. Do we?
Is that the synagogue?
Yes, what you're looking at right now is the synagogue. I thought I had a picture of it, but if it's maybe there's a picture later. Oh no, we'll see a picture about it in the video. We're going to see a video soon. But
Not in the law.
they had a Geniza box, which was used by Maimonides and earlier, but for some reason it was never buried. We don't know why. And sometime in the 19th century, the academic scholars of Judaism, not necessarily Jews, but different professors, realized that they have a collection here of documents
I think I'll take a bite.
of over 1,000 years of Jewish documents. And they started sifting through it, and a lot of it, was torn up and rubbed away. But there's many, many interesting discoveries that they made about Jewish history and Jewish scholarship. And one of the discoveries they made is the biography of Ovadia the Ger. They discovered a story written by the author about himself. Ovadia the Ger, Ovadia the convert. Now, because it was, it wasn't a very organized, it was a dump in a way. So it took many years for all the different pages to be found. Until today, some pages are missing. And even on the pages that we have, some of the words are not clear. However, we do have a story, which I'm going to share with you, and we'll learn it, we'll read it together, and we'll see the story in his own words. And we're not going to read the whole manuscript, but you could look online. I'll send you the link after. There's a whole website dedicated by a professor, I believe his name is Norman Gold, Professor Norman Gold, which uncovered this story. So it's a story which was only found out recently. So here's the story. Ovadia was born in Normandy, and he was a Norman. His family was raised in southern Italy, and his family settled in a town called Opidio Lucano around the year 1074. And this is a story. So let's start reading the first part of the story, text number 7. And it starts mid-sentence because some of the words are missing. Charlotte, do you feel up to reading for us text number 2?
I'm gonna let Michael read.
No, well, all right, I will.
Okay, Michael, go read for us.
Or is there someone else that may want to read?
We'll go back to Victoria. Text number 7.
7, okay. Let's see, his name is Opidio. He took a wife named Maria, and Maria conceived and bore unto
Drew.
Drew, her husband, 2 sons on the same day. The firstborn, according to the usual manner of women as to their children, to whom they gave the name Rodgerius, that is Rodger. I guess I'm pronouncing that right. As for the second,
We'll never know.
I know.
Yes.
As for the second, his lower parts came out first, his mother bearing him with great pain. She gave him the name Johannes. This is Giovan. the youth grew up, Rogarius became a man who sought the sword in warfare, whereas Johannes became a man seeking knowledge and wisdom in books.
So this is the story of Avadia's birth. Born in Italy, and twins, right? There's two people here, his twin, Roger, let's call him Roger for simplicity's sake, and Johannes. And he sort of writes in the story comparing himself to the biblical twins, Yaakov and Esav. Esav, the older twin, became a warrior, and this is what Roger did, and that was the custom in families in those days, that, you know, the oldest son would always be, you know, the leader of the family, the knight, and the younger son would become a priest. And that's what he did. He became a learner. He began to learn and to study. And his path was set up for him to become a priest in the Italian church. Now, it happened, the second part of the story is text number 8 with some shocking news. Lindred, could you read for us text number 8?
It happened at that time regarding Archbishop Andreas, the high priest of the city of Bari, that the Lord put the love of the Torah of Moses into his heart. He forsook his land, his priesthood, and all his glory, and came to the city of Constantinople, where he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. He endured sufferings and hardships. He arose and fled for his life from before the Gentiles, seeking to slay him. But the Lord God of Israel saved him from the hands in purity. The Lord protected proselytes. Blessed be the Lord forever. Many went up after him, and observing his deeds, they did as he had done. They also entered the covenant of the living God. All the sages of Edom, Christendom, were ashamed that they had heard the report about him. Johannes heard of the events concerning him, that he was still a youth in the house of Druze, his father.
So here we have the story of Johannes. And here it seemed like he's writing the story in his biography, and thank you, Lindred, because it made a big impression on him that someone, it doesn't sound like there were any Jews, and were there Jews in France at the time? I don't know. They kept on being expelled. It's hard to keep track, but one of them, a bishop, no less, converted to Judaism. And that was shocking. It was shocking to him. And the story continues that in the year 1096, he became a priest. And then he had a dream. What was the dream? We don't know. They haven't yet discovered that page of the biography, or maybe they never will. But the point is, we don't know what the dream was. I think maybe that page, the words are rubbed out, but what they say is that it was a vision of himself standing in a church, and it had to do with the crusades that were being waged at the time. And his reaction to the dream was that he decided to study the entire Torah in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew. I guess up until that point, he was studying the Latin translations, whatever the church provided to him, and he decided to do his own research. And all we know is that at one point he decided to convert about 7 years later. So he was ordained in the year 1096 as a priest, and by the year 1102, we know he was Jewish. How do we know? Because if you look on page 16, we have a fragment of a prayer book that Ovadia wrote for himself. He wrote for himself a prayer book. In those days, there was no printing press. So if you wanted a prayer book, you had to write it out. And in there, he wrote an inscription which corresponds to the year 1102. So we know that by the year 1102, he already converted to Judaism. Where was this conversion done? So in the same pile, they found another document. They found a document which was written by Rav Baruch ben Yitzchak of Aleppo in Syria. And the document was a conversion certificate, an ancient conversion certificate. And you could see a picture of it in figure 1 in text number on page 18. And I'm just going to read some lines from this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. In fact, we don't even have a translation of the whole certificate, but it describes what the conversion process was like for him. And it says, and the point of this conversion certificate was that when he should come to other Jewish people, they shouldn't question his Judaism. Sounds like he didn't look Jewish. He looked Norman, however Normans looked like at the time. And then he needed people to understand that he's Jewish. So this letter says as follows. This man, the bearer of the letter, they told us that, I'm just going to read different parts of it. He said that he's a man of a great family. His father was an important officer. He's an expert in the reading of books. He returned to the Lord of Israel with all his heart and all his soul. And let's focus on the third paragraph here. When he came to convert, they informed him that the Israelites were in sorrow, oppressed, deprived, and scorned. Meaning they started to discourage him. They said, why would you want to join the Jewish people? In the year 1102, the Jews were on the run from basically everywhere. It was against the Crusaders had Israel, and the Muslims had the Almohads, who were trying to forcibly convert people to Islam, and the European countries. I think England at that point already kicked out the Jews. It was not good to be Jewish, especially at that time. Why would you want to do that? And he answered, do I not know the Israelites are despised and scorned? If only I could be worthy to join Israel. He said, yes, even so, I want to join the Jewish people. After it was discerned that it came out of love, they informed them some lenience and some severe commandments, and they informed them of the punishment for infractions of the commandment. And they describes that they began teaching him the Torah, and when he accepted the conditions, they performed the circumcision, he performed the ritual bath, and he was made an Israelite. So it goes through the process of conversion, which actually is the same process that we use today. It starts off by discouragement, and they teach the potential convert the obligation of mitzvahs and the consequences, because if someone's not Jewish and they eat non-kosher, there's no consequences. Someone's Jewish, then there's divine, then God doesn't like it as much. So why take it on, right? And you could be guilt-free. Why would you want the Jewish guilt? So you have to teach that. And then they did circumcision, immersion in a mikveh. This is the exact same method that the Talmud prescribes for conversion. Now, this letter was written by Rav Baruch of Syria. And there's a very interesting point here, which is that this letter was not written by the actual rabbis that converted him. If you look at the letter, it was written by a rabbi who was writing about other rabbis that performed the conversion, right? Why couldn't the original rabbis just give him a letter? And not only that, this letter doesn't mention the names of the rabbis that did the conversion. And we'll never know why, but one of the explanations given, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that it was illegal. First of all, how did Ovadia end up in Syria and Egypt if he was born in France, right? And the answer is it was illegal to convert to Judaism in France, especially if you were a priest. If you were a Christian priest and you wanted to convert to Judaism, you also could, just jump in the lake. It was not healthy. It wasn't a good way to keep your head. So in order for him to be Jewish, he had to flee. He had to run away. So, and not only that, let's say if he converted in Italy, any of the Jews that would have participated in his conversion also would have been in danger to their lives. So we could assume that he couldn't carry a document which had evidence against the people that were helping him, but he also needed some sort of document. So in Syria and Egypt, where they were a lot more tolerant of the Jewish people, he was able to get those documents, and those rabbis wouldn't want to endanger the Italian rabbis, so they had to, not use their names. So, and that's why maybe in his biography, maybe he never even wrote the details of how he converted, because that it was dangerous for the next 500 years. That danger didn't go away till very recently, which is why there weren't that many converts till very recently. There were many, but not as many as there are today. And that's why, so that's a very interesting Avadia. And we'll just say a few more things about him, because we have to go to the next story also, which is that what happened after his conversion. So it says he wandered around a lot of different places. He had many different trials and tribulations. Text number 10, it says he traveled to Israel, and he traveled to the Euphrates and to Baghdad, and people wanted to kill him, and he joined the yeshiva, and the story continues. And one of the reasons how we know this is a real story and not just some made-up story is, besides for the fact that we have the original documents, it's also that everything he writes about the historical events of his times could be what was verified. Like it corresponds with all the other records of those events. And eventually he ends up in Egypt, and he ends up, it seems like that's where he passed away, but we don't know much about it. But what I want to share with you before we go on to the last story, which is that something very unique that we could, I'm sorry, I keep on not keeping up with this slideshow. Please excuse me. But you know what? I'm going to send you the slideshow after the class in the email, so you could pursue the slideshow at your own leisure. However, give me one moment. So there's something about Avadia which is fascinating, which is that one of the documents they discovered was a song that he wrote, and a song with musical notes, which in fact makes it the oldest Jewish sheet music. Very old. It's from the year 1102. And it's the oldest Jewish sheet music that we have. And it's he wrote a few songs. This is the most famous one. And he wrote it with Italian notes. And obviously, I don't know if people today know exactly how to render it, but we'll see in a moment how researchers reconstructed the song. And it's a poem about Moses and the giving of the Torah. So it sounds like it was a song composed for the holiday of Shavuos. And it's, again, fascinating how the oldest Jewish sheet music was written by a convert, and he wrote this beautiful song. We don't know if he wrote the words or composed the song, composed only the tune, but it shows a very, very deep appreciation for the giver of the Torah. And let's watch the song. So what I'll do is I just want to make sure that those on the Zoom could hear. Were you able to hear that? Jack and yeah? Okay, good. Here we go.
Ovadia the Convert wrote the oldest surviving piece of Jewish sheet music. These pages were preserved in the Geniza storage room of Cairo's Ben Ezra Synagogue, which Ovadia would have frequented. Recently renovated, the Ben Ezra Synagogue still stands in its original location. This is the song.
ועל הרעה תנחם, כמשה מיכס חזיון חוק עדות, חזה במערב ולא בחידות, כמשה מזאת התורה לימד ושינן, זכה ויבוא בתוך העם, כמשה מקם 40 יום בשמיים, קוים בלא לחם ולא מים, וכבוד אדוני עלייך זרע.
All right. That was Avadia the Convert's song. What do you guys think about that?
Amazing.
It's interesting. It's amazing. Well, now you could say that you heard the oldest Jewish song. I personally, I don't know how to sing it still. It's a very old-fashioned, it sounds to me a very old-fashioned, I've heard other people describe it almost like churchy.
Like a Gregorian chant.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, if it was
It
using
makes
Latin,
sense.
if it was using the Italian notes, it's gonna sound churchy.
Yeah, and you know what? Jewish music has always taken from the region where it's from. So Jewish Arabic music sounds Arabic, Jewish European music sounds European. But it comes back to the point that converts have a very high soul. They have the ability to take something from the darkest and turn it into light. So whatever sparks of holiness was in that music, he was able to extract it and turn it into a song praising God. But it's very fascinating. And I'm just amazed that they know how to read those notes. Like, how do they know? I don't know, but we'll trust them on it, right? It sounds
Rabbi, can I ask
right.
a question?
Go ahead, yeah.
Why do we refer to him as the convert? Aren't we supposed to accept conversion as part of our people already, and
It's a
not
great
single
question.
out convert?
It's a great question. And Jack is asking that when the Torah actually warns us several times that you shall not remind the convert of his past. You shall not, you shouldn't say, oh, you were just a convert. And you'll notice I kept on referring to him as Avadia the convert. And if you notice, that's how he refers to himself. So look, for example, on text number 10, because he wrote this about himself in third person. Avadia the convert then went. Avadia the convert came. He keeps on referring to himself as Avadia the convert. So it seems like for him, it was a badge of honor. Like he was a very unique person in this time to convert to Judaism, especially with all of that persecution that came with that. For him, it was actually a badge of honor. And Onkelos also is referred to in Talmud as Onkelos the convert. So you're right. I guess a convert should not be called a convert unless he decides to. So what Jack, you bring up a good point that you should not go to your convert friend and say, "Hello, John the convert." You're right, because that would not be polite. But if he decides to refer to himself, well, today it's not really acceptable. It's not as uncommon and unique, but that's how he referred to himself. So that's why we keep on calling him that.
Thank you.
All right. But it's a great question. And again, here we have another example of how a convert enriched Jewish history. The oldest Jewish translation of the Torah, the oldest Jewish song is, well, we don't know if Uncle, I'm not going to say first because there could have been earlier translations of the Torah, which we don't have. And there could have been earlier Jewish sheet music that we don't have. But the oldest surviving Jewish sheet music is Avadia's song. Now, we have a few more minutes, so let's get to the last story of today, which is the story of Avraham ben Avraham. This story is a little more recent. This happened in the 18th century, and we'll say over the story. And this is a person that paid the ultimate price to join the Jewish people. And the story goes as follows. This is a story about a man known as the Graf Potecki. Graf is a Polish word for noble, or I don't know if it's Polish or Lithuanian, but he was a Graf Potecki. His name was Valentine, and he was a son of Polish nobility. And at the time, it was strictly illegal for a non-Jewish Pole to become Jewish. And the story, not only that, you weren't even allowed to write about it. And yes, there was very, very strong censorship in the 18th century. So we know that a lot of, for example, today, there's a whole book about all the parts that were removed from the Talmud by the local church censors. Anything they found in the Talmud that they found offensive to other religions, they would remove. And they weren't allowed to print it. And you weren't even allowed to say stories. They weren't allowed to print stories of Poles that rebelled. So as we'll see, that this story wasn't printed till 100 years after it happened. When it happened, it was orally passed down, but the first printed record, we'll see later, is actually earlier printed records, but the text we're going to focus on is a book that was printed in 1862, which was published in Prussia, which wasn't as, they didn't have such a strict censorship. And so here's the point, as we'll see in a moment, because this story was passed orally for many years, it didn't, the story got a beard. It grew legends. So there's various different versions of the story we're going to say, but this is the story we're going to say for tonight. And let's read text number 12. Yanko, Jacob, can you read for us text number 12? It's on page 27.
The year was 5479, which is 1719. A Polish nobleman named Potocki had a brilliant son. The local university in Vilna was no longer sufficient for the boy, so his father sent him to study in Paris. At the same time, a nobleman in the region of Samogita named Zarebbi also had a brilliant son, and he was also sent to study in Paris. The two young men became very close friends. One day, as the two young men were strolling in a garden, they happened to cross an old man reading a book. Engrossed in study, impressed by the way the old man was studying, the young men asked, "What is the name of the book you are studying? What are its contents? Theology or some other subject?" The old man told them, "It is a book of the divine Torah." "Please teach us from this precious book," the young men asked the venerable elderly scholar. "We also wish to learn this Torah of truth." My dear children, the old man responded, I cannot teach you from this book because you will not understand its contents and style. Also, you are forbidden from studying this book by law because it is contrary to your religion. Listen to us, wise old man, the young student said. Hashem has blessed us with great intelligence. Have mercy on us and teach us this dear Torah. Do not be afraid of the government. We will keep it secret. Please do this for us and show us the light. The old man had mercy on the students and studied with them. They studied Torah for 6 months and understood it well. They recognized that the Jewish religion is the truth and could no longer tolerate their religion. Can we just stay here all our lives? They asked each other. Let us travel to Amsterdam, and there we will convert.
That's the story. Thank you, Jacob. And Amsterdam at the time was a lot more tolerant, and it allowed people to convert without killing them, which is nice. And they decided to flee Poland. But the story goes on that Valentine, this young man, wasn't sure yet. He was still doubtful. So he traveled to Rome, to the Vatican. He wanted to really, clarify everything that he can, to spend time with the most learned theologians of his religion. And whatever he found there, he decided that it's not for him. And he decided that he does want to convert to Judaism. And he traveled to Amsterdam. Amsterdam was, like we said, very tolerant. Also, no one knew he was going to be a Polish noble. He could be anonymous. And he successfully traveled to Amsterdam, and he successfully converted to Judaism. And he chose the Jewish name of Abraham, Avram. Now, a convert, right? We always know that when someone converts, when you call someone to the Torah, or when you want to say a prayer for someone, we say, Shmuel ben Esther or Shmuel ben Noach. We say the person's name and their father's name or their mother's name. But a convert, they don't say their father's name or mother's name. They say Abraham or Sarah, because since they converted to Judaism, it's as if they had became a new being. And their parents, their lineage goes straight to the first Jew, Abraham and Sarah. So his name became Abraham, son of Abraham, Avraham ben Avram. So he had a double name. And for some reason, this Abraham ben Abraham, Avram ben Avram, decided after a few years in Amsterdam that he needs to go back to Poland. We don't know exactly why, but he decided he had to go back to Poland to obviously anonymously. He wasn't going to go back to his parents and say, hey, it's me, your Jewish son. But he settled in a little town called Ilya, where he thought he could remain anonymous. And the story, which book continues, I'll just say text 13 outside, that he was praying in a synagogue, and a young man, son of a local tailor, first was walking in the synagogue and acting very rowdy and very disrespectful. And this Avram ben Avram rebuked him and said, this is a synagogue, you should behave. This is not the way you should behave here. And they got into some sort of quarrel, and this young man's father was an evil man, it seems, and even though he was Jewish, he went to the local authorities and informed on Avram ben Avram. He said, what we have here? We have a son of the Graf Patetsky. His son is here, and he's Jewish. And he converted to Judaism, and now he's actually making fun of Christianity, which was a big no-no in 17th, 18th century Poland, Lithuania. So, of course, he was arrested and imprisoned. And when he was imprisoned, they really tried, delegations of priests and bishops tried to bring him back to their religion, because it was I guess it was embarrassing that the son of a noble should choose the religion. And back in those days, they were not so tolerant as they are today. So, and he became a legend among the Jewish people everyone heard about this Avram ben Avram. There's a legend, and especially Lithuanian Jews. All Lithuanian Jews have their traditions and stories and legends about Avram ben Avram, because he was the hero to the Lithuanian and Polish Jews. Story goes that the great rabbi of Lithar, of Avram, Rabbi Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon, sent a message of encouragement to this, to his prisoner, and the story has a sad ending. That on the holiday of Shavuos, we'll get to the year in a second. He was brought out. They ripped out his tongue, and he was burned at the stake on the second day of Shavuos, and all in the city of Vilna in Lithuania, in Vilnius, Lithuania. And even though it was a holiday, none of the Jews in the city went to the synagogue that day because they were scared. They were terrified. It was the day that they were killing a Jew in the city square. They stayed home, and it says he went joyfully, like a man dancing towards God's mountain. He was happy to give up his life to be Jewish. He wasn't sad. In fact, the story goes that they offered to sneak him out of jail using some Kabbalists came to him and said that they had they were able to use Kabbalah to sneak him out of jail. And he refused. He said he didn't want to use spiritual ways to get out of his faith. He felt that this was his faith. He said that it was a privilege for him to die for God. So, and there's actually a tradition among Lithuanian Jews about a tune of a song which he sang as he was going to the gallows, or to the stake to be burnt. He sang a song, and there's a tradition among Lithuanian Jews how the song goes, which we'll see in this video.
The righteous convert Avraham ben Avraham was sentenced to death for converting to Judaism. Refusing all entreaties to abandon Judaism, he was burned at the stake in Vilna on the second day of Shavuot, 1749. The grave of Avraham ben Avraham in the old Vilna Jewish cemetery was a popular pilgrimage site for generations. This cemetery was destroyed by the Soviets in 1950.
No.
Tradition has passed down the tune with which Avraham sang some of his final prayers.
אבל אנחנו עמך, בני וריסך, בני אברהם, אוהבך, שנשבעת אלוהי בהר המוריה, זרע יצחק יחידוי, שנקד על גבי המזבח. אבל אנחנו עמך, בני וריסך, בני אברהם, אוהבך, שנשבעת אלוהי בהר המוריה, זרע יצחק יחידוי, שנקד על גבי המזבח.
Soviets right now.
So that's the second song of the night, my friends. And this is his story. And the story goes that after he was burned, the local Jews bribed to get his ashes, and they buried it in Vilna. And for many years, there was a burial site. You have a picture of it on page 33 of his grave. But in 1950, the Soviets moved that cemetery, and today there's a dispute Some people say that they know where he's buried, where they moved the body or the ashes to. Some people say no, but it was this structure that you see, that picture, I don't know when that picture was taken, but it was taken before 1950. Doesn't exist anymore. Here's a question. It's a very nice story. There's one question, right? Is it a true story? So historians have tried to, because the story happened in the 1750s, and the only book that came out about it, the first book was 1862, 100 years later, and there's so many different versions. Some historians said it's a legend, it never happened. But I want to tell you tonight about two very interesting things. Number one is that in the year 1755, there was a book published by Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a Jew who lived in Amsterdam, and he describes in the book about a story in Vilna of a family from the family Potocka that converted. And maybe his story, he's not an eyewitness, but we know that the story was going around in the year before 1755. So 1862 maybe was the first time the book was published that said about the story, but it's already mentioned in Jewish works when it happened. And then recently, someone with, I guess the miracle of the internet found a British newspaper from the year 1753. This is from the London Magazine, or the Gentleman's Monthly Intelligencer. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. And this is the report. Should I read this with an English accent? I'm not going to do that. But who wants to volunteer? I'll just read it. As you'll see, it's written in Old English. It goes as follows. From Wilna in Poland, June 11th, we have an instance equally shocking of Popish Catholic revenge against a Jew as follows. So I'm guessing that 1753 was after the Church of England was established, right? Right? I don't know. I guess they had a certain pleasure in making fun of the Catholics because they weren't Catholic. And here's what the story says. The court of the judicature in a city pronounced a sentence a few days ago against an upstate named Raphael Santamani, a native of Croatia, who after being educated in the Christian religion, renounced it at the age of 12 years, embraced Judaism, and took the name of Abraham Isaacowitz. While he was in prison, several zealous priests daily visited him, showing him the heinous of the crime of apostasy, and exhorting him to repent and return to the church. And for a day or two, they had some hopes of reclaiming him. But they soon found themselves mistaken. He was so hardened that neither for the torments he was to suffer nor the offer of pardon could make any impression of him. The 9th instance, he was led to execution. Being arrived under the gallows, the executioner plucked out his tongue and flung it into the fire before his face. Then, with his hands tied behind him, he was thrown alive into a heap of blazing sticks. I guess that's what it still means. When his body was consumed, the ashes were scattered in the wind. This poor wretch suffered death with great resolution, not so much as a groan, or at least sign of fear, having escaped from him. So here we have a British newspaper report, which, while it's not exactly the story was said, but there's very, very similar elements, right? The same story of converting, the same story of dying. The difference is, the discrepancies, first of all, the year. The year here is 1753, and the year that the story of Avram and Avram happened was 1749. But 4 years, we'll forgive it. Then the name in the background is a different name. It's Raphael Santamani from Croatia, not Valentine Potocki from Poland. But maybe that could be explained that his family, which was rich and connected, didn't want people to know who this was, and they made sure that the names were changed. But this name or that name, the story is historical fact. It was report. We have two different people, two different publications reporting it in real time, and maybe we don't have all the details correctly, but we have this person, a Jewish hero, who converted to Judaism and paid the ultimate price. Not when it was popular. It wasn't, he had nothing to gain. but he did it because he felt there was a truth. And this brings us to, while Jews don't seek out converts, some of our greatest and our best are people that chose to join the Jewish people. In fact, there's a fascinating line from the Talmud, which you have it in text 17, that God exiled Israel among the nations only so that the converts would join them. Doesn't mean that we should seek out converts, but the wording is that when the Jews are exiled out of the land of Israel and they're forced to mix with the whole entire world, that's God's way of raising up sparks throughout the world. Meaning we're not here for ourselves only, we're here to attract these different sparks. Some sparks, are just don't have to become Jewish, and some sparks choose to become Jewish. And they have extremely powerful, in order for, I'll put it like this, if you need a spark that has to stay burning in a place where it's cold, it has to be a very powerful spark. So these sparks that come are very powerful, like this Avram ben Avram, who was an inspiration for many people. And just one last thought before I conclude, I encourage you, I don't want to go over time, to read text 18, which is a Hasidic idea, which is that we all can become converts, whether we are Jewish or non-Jewish. Doesn't mean you have to actually convert to Judaism, or if you're Jewish, doesn't mean you have to convert out of Judaism. But this idea of taking a part of ourselves and making a radical change within ourselves, doing something that we usually don't do, and try to draw from the inspiration of these people that made radical changes, this is, we could become converts in our own way. And with that, my friends, we're gonna conclude tonight's lesson. We had 3 stories of Avram. We had the story of Onkelos, Ovadia, and Avram. And next week, I hope you'll join me, whether online or in person, where you'll be watching the next week's video, which is, we're going to talk about different Jews that had tremendous influence. We're going to actually expound upon the idea of the 7 Noahide laws. We're going to talk about a Jew that led Muslim armies, talk about a Jew that actually influenced the U.S. Constitution, as we'll see, and more. That will be next week. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me tonight, whether you came out here or you spent part of your precious Wednesday evening. I'm sure you had many things to do, and yet you chose to join us, so I appreciate it. And thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Very nice to meet you. I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yasher Koach.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you. Shekoach. Thank you for joining. Each one of you had your own voice, added your own voice and contributions. Any questions before we conclude?
No.
Okay, amazing. All right, thank you so much. And we'll be here next week, same time, same place, same channel. Look forward to that.